So, Ginger, thank you so much for coming back to the podcast. I'm super happy to have you here, and it's always an honor when someone agrees to let me interview them twice. That makes me so happy.
Thank you
So
for having
welcome
me.
back. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the reason that we have you here is because since we last talked, you had mentioned this at the end of the last podcast, you told us to look out for it, and it came out. You have published another book, and I have it here on my Kindle because I couldn't get the actual copy of it in time. I love like the books of it all. But you have written a amazing guide called Very Simple, Straight Up Exercise with Type 1 Diabetes.
Yeah. So I like to tell it like it is. That's what the book's about.
And it really does. It's so, I mean, I've seen some other books, instructional books, and I've, looked at them a few years ago, and they were quite heavy and academic. And even though I like to think, I can grasp it, I worked in healthcare and all this other stuff and trying to manage it in a child and figure out what's happening when they're doing sports or activities. But it's a very different story when you're actually having to manage it, and it's overwhelming because there's so much going on. I think it's so challenging. It can be such a burden and so many extra things you have to think of. So really, congratulations on breaking it down into something that's understandable and easy to follow. And also the way that you've sectioned it, the chapters and everything, it's really, really so good.
Thank you. I have been writing about exercise with type 1 diabetes in articles for a long time and teaching people about it for a long time. And so I really wrote this because I was like, you know what? I think I have all the nuggets and nuts and bolts that I know will apply to most people, and that what most people need for the average workout. I'm not teaching you how to run a marathon in this. Obviously, all of it can apply to parts of training for something more extensive like that, but this is really for the everyday exerciser. And it doesn't matter what type of workout it is, it teaches you the science of what's going on in your body and what your body needs between insulin on board, the timing of your workout, the type of your workout, the time of day. If you just drank coffee, like every variable that is really those everyday things that we're all juggling. Because exercising with type 1 is so complicated. And when you explain it to non-diabetics, it blows their mind, and we're so used to juggling with all of that complicated chaos that we forget, like, wow, it is amazing that we manage this every day, let alone while exercising, right?
It really is. And even though, I'm a caretaker, but when I was reading your book, I got tired. Like it made me mentally tired because of all the things that you have to think about. And
just
sometimes
to go for a walk.
Just to go for a walk. Some days just finding the motivation, if you don't have diabetes, finding the motivation to go exercise is challenging enough. And then if you want to do something a bit strenuous or you're pushing yourself, that's hard. And then if you have to think, oh, what will this do to my blood sugar? What did I eat before? What am I eating after?
Am I going to feel terrible halfway through just a dog walk because my blood sugar is plummeting? And I've gotten so many messages over the years, private messages or friends with type 1 reaching out and just saying, I'm so scared to exercise because it's so exhausting when my blood sugar crashes. And those are the people that I really want to give them like the information, because anybody can learn this, right? And it's really just information and then learning how to apply it to your day. And that is what I try to do with this book, is help you not be scared because you understand what's going to happen based on the variables, and then how to prepare and better control what's going to happen.
Amazing.
So right this very minute, I'm baking.
Is it you're baking? Okay, we'll pause. Yep. While you're picking that up, is my sound okay?
Yes.
Okay.
And we can include this in the podcast. I'm baking a blueberry crisp for my kid's swim instructor. And I believe in eating dessert. And that's also why it's important to learn how to exercise as a person with type 1, because if I didn't exercise every day, I'd have a lot more trouble managing my weight and my blood sugars around my daily dose of dessert.
It's exciting. I think so. Then probably the question that would come up from listeners, would you give us that recipe later?
Oh, I mean, it's just blueberry crisp from the internet. There's nothing, the only special thing about it is that the blueberries are freshly picked from an organic farm in Vermont. So
That's
give you that.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is probably the secret ingredient
Yeah.
that
Pretty
that
amazing.
makes it special. Oh, yum. Okay. So I actually have eaten blueberry. Do you ever eat blueberries at breakfast? And what does that do to your blood sugars? Do you ever?
I need a lot of insulin for blueberries.
Yeah.
It also depends on, there's actually like 20 different breeds of blueberries,
Oh,
and some
wow.
are sweeter than others. And when I go blueberry picking, I pick the sweetest, biggest ones because why not? And I mean, you definitely, compared to the ones you could get at Costco that don't taste nearly as sweet, you know, like it's just like bananas too. Depending on when you eat that banana, totally changes how much sugar is in the freaking banana. It's just not simple, right?
No,
And
it's not.
another crazy thing we deal with type 1.
That's true. That's true. I didn't know that there were that many types of blueberries because
Yeah.
we get a few different ones here. And I notice because they're bringing food from different countries in Dubai, I notice blueberries that come from Africa tend to be really good and sweet.
Oh,
And I think a lot of fruits so that we get here, sometimes they may have to pick them earlier so that they're ripe when they get here. They don't go bad in transit or whatever they do. But
yeah,
that was
definitely.
fascinating.
Yeah.
And
And
for those of you listening, she's
I am
scanning her arm.
right before this, I ate a black plum, and I think I'm eventually going to need a small dose of inhaled insulin for it, but I'm waiting just in case I had it already insulin on board for cover the carbs in the plum. It's a game.
And that's a good segue into actually how you started the book. And I'm glad that you started it the way you did, because when I read things about diabetes, I try to think if my son were reading this book, you know, and the first topic is mindset in the first chapter. And I love that you started with that, because even if you don't have diabetes and you're exercising, mindset is so important. But if you do have diabetes, I can't imagine how much more that plays an even bigger role than if you're not facing a chronic condition.
And I mean, the biggest message really is you can get pissed off and frustrated and give up if you'd like, but then you don't get to learn how to exercise safely and successfully with type 1. And I could have done that a long time ago. I did very little help from any medical professionals when I first set out in my 20s as a personal trainer and yoga instructor and competing in powerlifting. And I absolutely could have just gotten pissed off and given up. But instead, I really encourage you to stop and look at and write down the variables that are going on and look at it as an experiment. And the experiment can't be frustrating. The results are just information. And it tells you that either you had too much insulin on board or not enough, or the timing was off, or you needed your insulin right after you finished working out, or halfway during, right? Or your adjustment in your temp basal before your jog. You did a temp basal 30 minutes before, but you actually still had too much insulin on board by the time you were jogging. You probably needed a temp basal at least 60 minutes before, or a more dramatic temp basal, right? Like, take a deep breath and look at the variables and see what you can change, because that's all it is. And I don't mean to simplify it, because obviously very complicated, but it is just a science experiment, and you get to tweak all the variables.
That's so true. And yeah, if it doesn't go perfectly or the way you want, if I'm learning something new, kind of part of, like you said, it's a game, and you have to realize that that's not a failure, that's a learning process, and that didn't work. So that means you need to go back and maybe try something else.
Yeah. I had a woman reach out to me the other day who said, well, my blood sugar always goes high right after I finish exercising. And I said, okay, you might want to talk to your healthcare team, because I'm not a doctor, right? About taking a small dose of insulin right after you finish your workout, because your liver, when you exercise, doing heavy weights, or even just moderate weights, your blood sugar can spike when you're done, because your body is going to go try to rebuild all that muscle and replenish the glycogen stores in your liver that you used for fuel during your workout. And so it is normal for your blood sugar to rise after your workout. And she said, well, no, but then I always go low later, after dinner. I said, well, then you might want to talk to your healthcare team about taking a little more insulin with your meals. And she argued with me back and forth a bit. And then she's like, oh, I think I get it. You're saying I need a little more insulin after exercising, a little more insulin after exercising, but a little less insulin with dinner, right? So it's tweaking. You adjust here, it means you might need a different adjustment here. And we just need to get the science first. And once you understand, like, oh, it's normal that my blood sugar is spiking after a weightlifting workout. It's my body actually doing all the things it's supposed to do, except for the producing insulin part.
That is so true. And even now, what I find with, a lot of people are very curious about CGMs that don't have diabetes and they're using them. And my husband actually does not have diabetes, but at one point in time went to a doctor for a checkup, had some elevated blood sugar, and he said, oh, you might be pre-diabetic. And I'm like, you don't sleep enough. That's probably, the issue. But that was my armchair expert diagnosis. But I said, put on a CGM and let's see what happens. And 2 days later was the weekend, and he did a weight workout, and he's like, oh my gosh, my blood sugar went up. I'm like, yeah, that's usually, I think, how it's supposed to work. So even people that don't have diabetes that are wearing them, I think they need to read your book just to understand how the body reacts and behaves.
And you know what
to different
he could
things.
also do? He could also go get his autoantibodies screened, for antibodies, because if your children have type 1, he could, I'm not wishing this upon him, but
Yeah,
he could have really latent adult onset of type 1 that has not shown itself yet. And
I never thought of that. I had mine screened once when we were at the Friends for Life conference in Florida, and I was like, yeah, I'm all about it. Like,
yeah, I would get him screened, because it could be his genes that fueled children's type 1, and he just hasn't fully developed it yet. I hear those stories of
Yeah,
people, they're diagnosed a couple years or decades after their children.
that is so that is fascinating. I never thought of that, because I just assumed that because he's working a lot, traveling, that his sleep is not helping.
But then
yeah,
also,
right.
for anybody listening, a lot of people say, well, what's the point of getting screened? He'll know the symptoms if he has them. There are so many therapies right now in trials, and some even getting FDA approved for early onset beta cell preservation. So they should end up on insulin anytime.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
This is a really booming time of trials and
Yes.
a lot of different things.
And
Way
you can
better than
only
I
seize
do.
them
But
if you get screened, right? You can only
yeah,
screen your children too. So I highly recommend, if you live in the US and you're listening to this, to visit T1detect.org. It's JDRF screening. And I would just look for screening options of autoantibodies. Those are the signs that you're developing type 1 years potentially before you have symptoms.
wow, amazing. And if you had the screening once, is there any chance that your genes would change and reprogram or do it, or once and that's
Not
it,
that
you're
your
done?
genes are changing. The general theory that the researchers have that agreed on is that most people who develop type 1 have autoantibodies before the age of 5, even if you don't actually have the full onset until teens or 20s. That doesn't apply to everybody. I've screened my children 3 times each.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's such a simple process with the Enable Biosciences finger stick, which is a little harder to get now, but it costs about $90. Or you can have your doctor request screening and take your kids to a blood lab. My kids have done that too. Why have I screened them 3 times? Because I don't want to miss an opportunity to get them on something like Tzield, which is FDA approved.
Hmm.
And one of my children did have a positive result, but she had also just had major surgery on her kidneys and her bladder.
Oh,
And so then I wanted to test again after to see that that positive autoantibody cleared up, and it did.
hmm.
So yeah,
Amazing. That's amazing. We'll put a
tangent.
link, we'll put a link in the show notes for people that are listening in US that have access to that if they want to pursue it further. So digress a bit. And one thing in that what we were talking about before leading to the next thing that I noted, I like that you separated and defined anaerobic versus aerobic activity, because I think a lot of people get confused when they start exercising. And let me back it up a bit. We're assuming right now that not everyone even knows the difference and what that means. So could you explain the difference between
Sure.
aerobic and anaerobic?
Yeah, and it's actually critical to understand this when exercising with type 1, because it can completely change the impact on your blood sugar. And we used to, or we are probably still told by our doctors, when you exercise, just eat 15 grams of carbs and that will prevent you going low. And then people end up at 300 because they didn't actually need carbs if their workout was anaerobic instead of aerobic. So aerobic is cardio. It's when you're doing something and that you're kind of maintaining that intensity for a prolonged period of time. So really beyond like 3 minutes can start that impact of cardio. And when you're doing cardio, your heart rate is elevated for a prolonged period of time. So let's say my heart rate's at 130 during my power walk. My body is using glucose primarily for fuel during cardio aerobic activity. Anaerobic is shorter bursts of intensity. And so because your heart rate is higher and your body is working harder, but it's at an intensity you can't sustain for 30 minutes straight or even 15, it's usually like 2.5 minutes or less, right? So intervals, even spinning, which is cardio technically, but in a spinning workout, you're going to do these bursts of intensity that you can only maintain for 30 seconds or a minute. And that triggers this different physiological process in which you're actually turning lactic acid into glucose, and you are releasing stored glycogen from your muscles for fuel, because your body can't get oxygen to the glucose cells in your bloodstream quickly enough to use glucose for fuel. So it has to come up with this other way of producing and getting fuel. And so that can spike your blood sugar if you happen to not produce insulin along with the process. And so understanding that is critical. Because you can also use it to your advantage. If I know that I still have a little bit of insulin on board as I arrive at the gym, and maybe I wanted to start my workout by running a mile on the treadmill, I can say, you know what, I know that I'm a little bit at a risk of going low here. So first I'm going to do my weights. And then by the time I'm done doing my weights, that insulin I still had on board will have diminished. And then I can do my cardio. And that will help cancel out some of that spike from the weights. And so you can use that knowledge to your advantage as you plan your workout.
That is very clever. Really, like, very smart. Instead of treating it with the food, or, if you're, especially you're training for something and you don't need or want the extra calories, for example.
Yeah, right. Being flexible, but knowledge is power. And I'm going to take insulin now. That black plum is definitely hitting my blood sugar.
Oh,
Taking a hit of inhaled insulin, which is not available in Dubai at this time. But
no, it is
I know that
not.
it's in the pipeline because I've heard Mankind talking about it. They are getting it. It's on its way.
That's amazing. Yeah, we eventually get things. Sometimes it's a year, 2 years later, but it does get here. I mean, we're usually on average like 1 generation or so, or a generation and a half behind on devices and things like that. But I mean, at the same time, I look at it like, I feel like we can't complain because we still have access to things that are helpful and useful, and it gets there. Everything has a process. So that's good. Plus, I feel like by the time it comes, when we, read things, that you're writing and other people are talking about or what they're doing, then I feel like we know so much about it already that
Right.
it makes it a lot easier to adapt and adopt.
Yes.
So for aerobic and anaerobic, is that the 100% of the time everyone's blood sugar will behave in that way?
Well, there's other variables at play, right? So there's also insulin on board. If you have too much insulin on board during an anaerobic workout, you still have the risk of going low because you're still doing physical activity that is going to increase the uptake of glucose because of all that insulin on board. So you still have to consider other variables. It is not cut and dry that I'm safe from a low because I'm lifting weights or I'm doing CrossFit and this is an anaerobic workout. You still need to think about what else is going on.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And if you're doing it in the heat, like in Dubai, my
Right.
son plays tennis and he has a very anaerobic response to tennis because I guess the, way that they're training and back
Yeah.
and forth running spurts, drills.
Yeah.
And as it gets hotter and we're not playing tennis now because it's too hot really. Although there's probably a few people doing it early morning and late.
Yeah.
But the heat, even if you're cautious about it, it can still really drive it down. Like,
And in the reverse,
lot.
if you get really dehydrated during cardio, your blood sugar can spike because
Yep.
the glucose becomes more concentrated. I run, here's a kind of a cardio and my blood sugar went up at the same time variable for you to consider. So I walk my dog every morning 2 miles, and then depending on my kid drop off schedule, and I pretty much right after go and run 2 to 3 miles, and I'm fasted. There's a helicopter flying around over me. Can you hear that?
No,
Okay,
not at
that's
all.
good. It keeps going round and round. So then I run fasted for 2 to 3 miles, and technically, because I'm fasted and I have my background insulin, and I take metformin to suppress dawn phenomenon. So I'm not taking insulin for dawn phenomenon, blood sugar spike. And then I know though that if I don't eat breakfast by 8 o'clock, my blood sugar starts to rise because my liver is saying, oh, you still haven't eaten. I'm going to give you some fuel. Here's some glucose. Good luck. Right. And I know that if I start my jog at 7:45, there's a good chance that even though I started that jog with a blood sugar of 94, like I did today, that by the time I get back, I could be over 150 because
Wow.
I've hit that window of when my liver starts releasing glucose because I have not eaten breakfast. So I could get pissed off of what happened. I did cardio. I shouldn't go up. Or I could think about, well, there's science happening here that I have yet to understand if you didn't know that your liver is releasing glucose. And I just know that's probably going to happen. I'm not going to take, especially if it's a 3-mile run, I'm not going to take a bolus of insulin anticipating that it'll happen because it could ruin my run if I get it, if it just doesn't happen that day, which it sometimes happens, right? Like that. Just if I did a lot of exercise the day before, I might be more sensitive the next morning, and that little 8 a.m. spike doesn't happen. So I wait for the proof that it's happening because I don't want to go low on my 3-mile run, right?
For sure.
But as soon as I got back, I checked my blood sugar. I was 160. I was not surprised. I took my bolus of insulin and I didn't go, much higher than that. So it's not perfect, right? I don't want to be 160 after a run, but that was the best way to manage that variable because I was.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm sure a lot of people are curious. They always ask this question, what to use to treat a low. So when you go out for a run, what are you taking with you in case you do go low?
I always have my fanny pack thing that's got my phone, and I have right now I have sugar packets in there, like the ones you get at the gas station for your coffee.
Yeah.
And I literally grabbed them from a gas station last time I was somewhere that I needed to, I thought I had glucose in my fanny pack and I didn't. I was like, oh shoot. So I snuck into a gas station and got some. And then I think I have like a little Halloween sized pack of Sour Patch Kids. So whatever I can fit in there that is compact and, can treat multiple lows. There's 4 grams of sugar in one of those sugar packets. But I rarely go low during exercise because I know what my risk of going low is based on my insulin on board and the timing of my workout. So it's just knowledge, right? And it's knowledge anybody can learn.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want my son to grow up too fast. I mean, he's a teenager, but I'm thinking sometimes I actually think it'll be really cool when he's an adult and he's done growing, because then he can better predict what his blood sugar is going to do if they're having a growth spurt or hormones or something. It can sometimes not be as consistent, I guess.
Well, but I would say in adulthood, there's so many variables that can change that too, of just, like if you just eat more heavy food one day, the next day you're just more insulin resistant, or menstrual
That's
cycle.
true. Yeah, that's true.
You know, before my menstrual cycle, I'm very resistant. And then there's like a couple days into it where I'm extremely sensitive to insulin. And I always think, wow, I've been cured. And like, oh no, wait, it's just day 4 of your menstrual cycle and it will go back to normal. And then, you know, day 6, I'm like, oh, I'm so stubborn. What's going on? I'm like, oh, right. It's day 6 of my menstrual cycle. It's just,
so interesting. Yeah, I guess well, this is just it. It's never ending when I think.
right. And you need to learn, I mean, thriving with type 1, I believe, is learning how to be flexible and also have that mindset of what's happening. Not, I suck at this just because the blood sugars aren't perfect, right? Of asking, there's something going on here that I'm not aware of or can't anticipate and predict, and can only respond to afterwards, and just not beating yourself up for it and taking the heavy emotion out of it.
Yeah, I think that like we discussed, like you said, mindset is everything. I'm looking down because I'm looking at the Kindle to find the chapter where you talk about the food and eating, and you talk about pizza. And you don't want to, you know, necessarily maybe eat that before, and you touched a little bit on that, but any other advice on food and eating?
Definitely. And around exercise specifically.
Yeah.
So if I want to have the most prediction of how my run is going to impact my blood sugar, the worst thing I could do is eat something that is very hard to predict, like pizza, right? And that is going to require funky insulin dosing because it's so slow digesting. I need some up front and some later. So I save those more indulgent treats for the end of the day, and I get my exercise done before them, because also it doesn't feel good to go for a jog with pizza in your belly. Maybe that's fun for some people, but not me. So the more consistent you can be, especially if you are really new to learning how to juggle your blood sugar around exercise, creating experiments where you're eating the same thing before or after. And you don't have to do this for the rest of your life. You don't have to eat that bowl of oatmeal and blueberries every day for the rest of your life, but for a week, just to see, so that you have one controlled variable there, right? And then the workout being the consistent and the insulin dosing, and then you can adjust because you have controlled variables, so you can see what's going on. Personally, I like to exercise before I eat anything, because there's a whole chapter in the book about this, of exercising in a fasted state, because that eliminates a huge variable, which is bolus insulin and food, right? And so not everybody wants to do that. And I do it at several different times a day. I do it first thing in the morning before breakfast, but I also create a fasted environment whenever possible. For my afternoon dog walk, I walk my dog about 2.5 miles in the middle of the day, and I don't want to have just eaten lunch right before that dog walk. So I try to time it when I have minimal insulin on board from a meal. And then if I don't get to do my jog in the morning because the kids schedule juggling, I'm going to probably end up doing my jog somewhere between 4 and 7 p.m. And I'm going to do the same thing of trying to make sure that I don't have a meal bolus on board. So that means if I was taking an injection of insulin, like Novolog, Humalog, that I would need at least 3 hours between the meal, bolus, and the exercise to have minimal insulin on board for that exercise. Because I use mostly Afrezza for my meals, have more flexibility. The smaller Afrezza dose has the biggest impact for about an hour. The bigger Afrezza dose is more like 2 hours that I would be conscious of that insulin on board window. So it's all about remembering how long has it been since I took a large dose of insulin for a meal. And then, of course, if you want to eat right before, you need to learn how to reduce your bolus. And that's where being consistent in what you eat and not eating something as troublesome or complicated as pizza comes in handy, because it's just more things to work around.
Yeah, too heavy anyway, like something. I'm assuming something like nice, easy, that's like one ingredient, like a banana and some nuts or
I mean, or
something
even
or
a
whatever.
salad, or I
Yeah.
mean, it could be a sandwich, it could be a salad. It's just be consistent and study that, use that one meal until you get the hang of it and you start to understand, like, oh, my body needs a 50% reduction in my meal bolus if I eat right before going for a 3-mile jog. Right? Or if right before a 2-mile walk, or right before CrossFit. And so it's an experiment. Take notes and be consistent until you get some firm data, and then you can be more flexible. You can try a different meal and a different, and then apply that same theory of the reduced meal bolus. Some people it's 75% before a CrossFit workout. Some people it might be a 50% reduction before that workout, right?
Amazing. And I also like your suggestions for post-workout food as well. I think it's really helpful, not just for people with diabetes, but really anybody. I think it's very healthy, practical. Protein shake and fruit, protein shake and oats, banana and peanut butter and milk. You don't have a nut allergy, of course, or apple and cheese, apples, veggies, and hummus. I mean,
real food. Yeah, that real food.
Yeah, not any. And what I see here, a lot of people are, curious. Oh, sport drinks. Can we talk a little bit about sport drinks? Because they're everywhere. They're marketed to teens and kids, and are they really
like Gatorade, Powerade?
Yeah, those kind of things.
Ones. Yeah.
Are they helpful
if you
for exercising with diabetes?
For most workouts, water is plenty, right? If you are exercising more than an hour, then a sports drink with a little bit of glucose and electrolytes is going to be helpful if you're, because you're going beyond that hour. And the diet ones have the electrolytes, and then they have mostly aspartame and sucralose. I personally avoid those. They have been banned and studied to heck, and depends on who's funding the study on what the results say on their safety. But the World Health Organization just recently deemed them as cancerous potential. So something to consider. I think you'd be better off drinking water personally than drinking aspartame and sucralose. But yeah, once you step into that training for longer things that are beyond that hour workout, those could serve you. Caffeine is something to really consider, because I meet people who say, oh, I'm so insulin resistant. I'm like, well, how much caffeine do you drink all day? Caffeine can tell and it's a little caffeine might not do this. Everybody's a little different on their sensitivity to caffeine. Personally, I can drink 1 cup of coffee a day, or get 1 serving caffeine a day. And if I have any more than that, my liver just starts dumping glucose, because caffeine, part of how it gives you energy, is telling your liver to release stored sugar. And once I've overdone that coffee consumption, it takes hours for that to calm down, and I cannot get it to budge with rapid acting insulin. And so I personally stick to 1 cup of coffee, and doesn't matter if I'm feeling groggy in the afternoon, go for a walk. That will wake you up far better than another cup of caffeine. And that extra insulin that you might be needing because you are a chronic caffeine consumer is going to play a role in storing more glucose for fat. It's going to play a role in how poorly you sleep, and just how you feel. And you think you need it, but probably what you need is just get up and go for a walk and let your brain, stop abusing your brain with caffeine.
I love that you highlighted that because one, there's some newer sport drinks that they not only have the sugar, but the caffeine. And like you said, sport drinks were initially kind of for marathon runners or ultra athletes
Yeah,
and
now we
not
just
just for,
abuse them. You don't need
yeah,
a sports drink before going to a CrossFit workout. Just
no.
show up and like be
Or
human.
after, I don't think so.
Anything.
Yeah. And then the caffeine as well, not necessarily just in the sport drink, but here in this part of the world. Well, I mean, you were in Abu Dhabi, maybe you saw, but there's a lot of coffee, a lot of coffee places and a lot of really good coffee. So, and people drink a lot of coffee throughout the day, all day. So
Yeah.
that's really good advice to,
I do that
and
in
a reason to
America
cut back on
too.
it. Is
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Coffee, coffee, coffee all day long. And
Mm.
if you have type 1, I think take a look at how much caffeine you're drinking, because it could be really driving a lot of insulin resistance higher. If you cut your caffeine, I would not be surprised if your basal insulin needs go down dramatically eventually, because you're constantly all day telling your liver to release more glucose and you're constantly presenting this stimulant.
That is fascinating. My son had an iced coffee yesterday and he doesn't typically drink coffee, but we were out and I usually don't drink coffee afternoon. And I was like, oh, okay, we'll get, whatever. And it was a small one, but his blood sugar was high last night. And so I wonder if that contributed to it. I wouldn't have thought of that.
If I were to drink that in the middle of the afternoon, I would be in the high 200s for hours. And it even for me applies to the amount in decaf. So there's something in decaffeinated coffee. I can't even do that. I'll be high for hours.
There's a little bit of caffeine in decaf. I mean, it's a small percent, but it's still there. It's still there. And so I want to move on now to another chapter that you talk about, which I think a lot of people are curious about: weight loss with type 1 diabetes and exercise. Can you shed a little light on that?
Sure. I mean, we just talked about one thing that could contribute to successful weight loss, which is look at your caffeine consumption, right? The trickiest thing for people when they set out trying to lose weight is you are doing all these things that reduce your insulin needs. So if you don't make those adjustments in your basal and bolus insulin needs, you're going to be going low all the time. Then you're going to be eating all the time and you're going to feel like giving up because this feels futile, right? And it would be futile if you don't make the adjustments. And those adjustments can come very quickly. If you suddenly start walking every day, the impact, not just around the hours you walked, but your overall basal insulin needs are going to go down nearly immediately. I noticed just from missing one day of doing 30 minutes of intense cardio, being more insulin resistant the rest of that day, right? So if you turn that in reverse, you need to make adjustments quickly. And then once you lose even just 3 or 4 pounds, that 5-pound mark is a big one, you'll need another reduction in your basal insulin. So frequent lows are a sign that you're getting too much insulin. And there are people who have high A1Cs who are having frequent lows. It doesn't mean that it's very confusing sometimes when you're having frequent lows, but you also have a high A1C and you're frustrated with high blood sugars. Frequent lows can come from not having enough basal insulin on board and you're constantly correcting highs, and therefore then you're also going low all the time. But for a lot of people, especially when you're trying to lose weight, you have too much basal insulin on board. You're going low all the time. I was just in a chat with a bunch of women who are trying to talk about weight loss and exercise in type 1. All of them really were saying, well, every time I start exercising, I go low. It's like, you have too much insulin on board. You have too much. I had to say it 18 times before anybody finally was like, oh, you're right. Right. So we should not be going low every day as type 1s.
And was that causing them to be afraid to exercise
Yeah.
then?
Right.
Oh.
And then it was causing them to have difficulty managing their weight because they believed that their basals ought to be up here and that
Mm.
exercise was too complicated. When in fact, once you start just making exercise a regular part of your life, you bring your basals down and that's your new default. And if you have a day or two where you don't get to do your exercise, then you bring up temporarily, but create that new default. To lose weight with type 1, truly the first step is to get your basal insulin doses down as low as possible so that you don't go low during ordinary activity. Right? They were saying, I can't even garden without plummeting. It's like, you have too much insulin on
Oh,
board.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's frustrating.
yes. And then consistency. So I'll tell you, I've actually gained 5 pounds this summer because I have broken from all my personal guidelines that help me normally manage my weight. I'm drinking alcohol feels like nearly every day of the week because it's summer in Vermont and people coming over and it's just
Right.
always feels like a Friday. And it's not a lot of alcohol. Doesn't matter if it's 1 glass or 2 or 3, it's still alcohol every day, and alcohol helps contribute to belly fat, right? I'm still exercising a ton, but I'm not eating my normal, like I usually eat just really light whole food meals during the day. And I feel like I'm not in any consistency about what I'm eating during the day. And I've been traveling a lot and eating more indulgent meals, and like I've just lost my consistency around very simple things. And that alcohol is a big one, I think. But
It has a lot of calories too. I mean, I
and
must
the
admit,
calories,
as a
yeah,
fellow, I don't know if it's wine, but I like wine, and yeah, it's
right. I mean,
calories.
that's an
Yeah.
extra 300 calories if you have 3 more glasses of wine on a
Mhm.
Monday and then add that up over the week. Potentially I'm drinking an extra 1,200 calories a week just in alcohol because I'm no longer limiting it to Fridays and Saturdays, right? It's
Yeah.
like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. It's like every day is, so I can get mad that I've gained 5 pounds, or I can just be honest with myself that I haven't stuck to my personal guidelines that I know help me stay leaner, right?
Mm. Yeah.
So get real about your habits and stop eating croissants for breakfast. That's not real food. That's a dessert. And, if get real, just be honest with yourself about what you're doing and what you're eating. And definitely, I don't believe in lifelong food tracking, but if you've never tracked what you ate for an extensive period of time, and I mean, even just a month, do it and
Yep.
write down the things that aren't perfect. Be
That
honest with
is so,
yourself.
yeah, it keeps you honest, and
Yeah.
then you see where the extra calories might be sneaking in. Like, I hate tracking stuff, but there was a time where I'm like, yeah, I need to like get it together. And I
Yes.
think really my weight gain was, I was just eating nuts like I was a squirrel or chipmunk or
Right.
something.
Right.
So much fat. I'm like, oh
Right.
yeah, nuts are healthy, but too
Yeah.
much is not really great. And when
And
you start
even,
writing it down,
yes. And even if you don't want to track all the calories right away, just writing down the food and the time of day you ate is a great way to catch yourself and like, am I really hungry right now? Do I
yeah,
really need to eat this? And then looking at the end of the day, how much of this is real food? Did I eat any
yeah,
vegetables all day? Right. So
yeah.
making, carrots and hummus and cucumbers, whatever, I don't know what the main raw foods are, that the raw veggies that you have the most access to there, but
Yeah. Stuff
making
like that. Yeah.
whole foods more of your default before you grab the sandwich and the fried chicken and the hamburger. And yeah.
Yeah. Whole plant-based foods are always best, especially for snacking. And I love what you said. It validates a discussion I was having actually with a coaching client. We were talking about food, and she had wanted to lose some weight. And she's like, I will not track food. I really hate it. I said, I feel you. I hate it too. I
Yeah.
said, but if you can, without having to weigh it, calorie count it,
Yeah,
if
you don't have to go.
if you're not type 1 and you're not learning your way around carb counts and having to,
Yeah.
calculate insulin and things like that, you still may need to weigh it, but without being too rigid, like you said, write it
Yeah.
down just to be aware, and it'll still add value to helping you understand how, things are really working or
Yeah.
not working, I think.
And again, we talked about fake sugars. I would look at how much diet soda you're drinking, because that's not water. It's not nothing. Just because it doesn't have any carbs in it doesn't mean it's nothing.
Right. And then there's studies that say that diet sodas, like your body is thinking it's something else and then behaving differently when you're consuming diet soda.
Yeah. And I mean, in type 1, that's hard to prove because we know it doesn't raise our blood sugar. But I do know some non-diabetics who have quit diet soda. That's the only change they made. And this woman lost 40 pounds.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah. It's just worth looking at because it's not a good thing.
It's processed. It's not
weird,
not good.
fake stuff, right?
Yeah.
So just take a look at it. I think diet soda should be a luxury item treat that is here and there.
It's got a higher tax here, but I don't think it's really stopped people.
Right.
Sodas in general. I think in some places in Europe they did that, and then here they put kind of a luxury tax or some kind of tax on it to deter people from drinking it, but I don't think it's really stopped anybody.
Cigarettes are very expensive. That hasn't stopped anyone from smoking them.
Yeah, right. The same, very similar thing.
Yeah.
And so we talked a little bit about weight loss. Are people starting to use people with type 1? Because we hear about Ozempic and all these other things that people with type 2 or obese, or even people that don't need it that are using it. Are people with type 1 using these new drugs for weight loss?
I take Ozempic. I'm taking a tiny dose and I've been on it since like November, maybe. And I didn't take it for weight loss. And I did lose like 5-6 pounds at first because you just feel so full the first month you're taking it. But I took it because my insulin needs kept going up and there was no reason for it. This was last year. And I also was having very dramatic dawn phenomenon. So metformin and Ozempic, and I'm on the teeniest dose of Ozempic you can take. And it's awesome because what it's actually doing for type 1s, and this is we're about to open a whole.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Information, yes.
Oh no.
And you can Google this article, the 6 dysfunctional hormones of type 1 diabetes. Search that, you'll find it at t1dexchange.org. Your body misproduces as a type 1 a whole bunch of hormones, not just insulin. And so what medications like Ozempic do, GLP-1 agonists, they replace our lack, they help you compensate our lack of the hormones that regulate appetite. They regulate how much sugar your liver produces all day. So as type 1s, part of why we struggle with our weight is because we overproduce sugar. We literally overproduce sugar all day long. So that means we need more insulin than we would normally be taking for our basal needs if we didn't have diabetes, which means we have more glucose being stored as fat. And then many type 1s feel this kind of constant sense of hunger. And GLP-1 agonists replace and help you compensate the hormones that tell your brain you're full while you're eating. And we are lacking those hormones, and we're lacking that whole system that does that properly for us. So they serve a significant purpose there. And I know there's a shortage, but I am in support of even non-diabetics who want to take these drugs. Obviously, there's people who don't really need to lose weight who are taking them. And I don't think that's wise because when you go off them, you will regain the weight because your liver starts producing more sugar again. So don't start it if you see it as a temporary thing and you can't get it in an affordable way, because you'll need to consider this as a long-term medication, just as insulin. Obviously, insulin is do or die, but you can't just go on this for a little bit and get the benefits and then go off and then continue those benefits, right?
Yeah, I have an interview I did. I think it's going to be air after this one, a clinic here that's managing, it's a diabetes clinic, a very good one. And we talked only about these drugs because there was a shortage, and how they're using it, what they're finding with their patients. And actually the owner of the clinic, he himself has used it. So he has personal experience with it as well. Being pre-diabetic, not diabetic, not type 1. but
Yeah.
it was very interesting. And yeah, I think it's a discussion to have for sure with your doctor if you feel like you think you want to try it or take it, because like you said, when you've stopped taking it, people gain the weight back. They also found a lot of people were losing muscle mass when they're losing weight.
Yeah, I
So
mean, there's a lot of,
yes.
I would, if you are obese and you're taking this and it causes dramatic rapid weight loss. Anytime you lose weight rapidly like that and you have a lot to lose, you're going to lose muscle. But if you are just a little bit overweight and using it for that, I would really encourage people to start on a really low dose and go very gradually, even more gradually than your doctor is being told by the drug companies to increase your dose, because you don't need to be on high doses to get the benefits if you're more patient. And you do need to apply lifestyle habits to get the benefits. You can eat your way through Ozempic if you want, right? I'm on Ozempic and I've gained 5 pounds this summer. It's not magic. You need to do the work, but it is a tremendous support. And even for someone who doesn't have diabetes, who struggles with overeating, and I have friends who don't have diabetes, who've taken it and have struggled their whole life with their weight, and it's really helping them and it's giving them support. And I want them to have that support. I have friends with type 1 who, as diagnosed in their 20s, gained 40 pounds because of that hyper reaction the body has once it gets insulin again, and the liver overproducing glucose. And we're taking way more insulin as type 1s than we would need if we didn't have type 1, because we're using this subpar stuff that's manufactured, right? It's not good.
It's not the
And
same.
it's not. I want the real deal, right? And so she went on Ozempic and she lost 40 pounds over the course of a year.
Wow.
And she's not binging on tacos and French fries all day to gain 40 pounds. It was just the diabetes diagnosis, truly. And so it's, I think the headlines are making it really silly, and there's a lot of bashing of only type 2s should be taking it. But I think there's so much science that demonstrates why type 1s need it. And we have another article titled GLP-1s in type 1 diabetes at T1D Exchange that can also demonstrate some research that's been done on it. It makes complete sense in type 1, even if you're not looking to lose weight.
I'll put it in the show notes. We'll link back to those articles. So if people want to find them, they'll be there. So we'll definitely share those. I realize we're getting almost finished with our time. I like the way that you ended the book. Where you say, can I read it? It's just a little bit. You say, now get ready for my Tony Robbins, Oprah Winfrey pep talk, because it's coming. Okay, here it is. If you're fortunate to have the critical basics, insulin, tech, healthcare, then you have 2 choices in this obnoxious disease. Option 1 is get mad, live in a state of constant frustration, blame yourself, blame the world, give up, do the bare minimum to keep yourself alive, and wrap yourself up in a big cozy bubble of anger for years to come. Or option 2, get mad, take a deep breath, take another deep breath, take notes, learn a little bit more, and try again. I thought that was really, that whole section is great.
Thank you.
I think you just remind people how to, I don't want to minimalize the challenge, but just kind of take it in stride and take a deep breath and take another deep breath.
Acknowledging that I understand this is really hard, but you can do it with the right mindset.
Yeah, your last sentence is, I hope this book inspires you to wake up and do what you can to thrive. And I think that it probably will do that for a lot of people.
Good. I hope so. Thank you.
So congratulations on a great book. Thank you again so much for joining me again. Really, it's always lovely to talk to you. And you don't have to write a book to come back anytime, but if you write another book, then we'll talk about that one.
Thank you. I'm planning to write a book about inhaled insulin, so we'll see.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. I'll need to read that one for sure so I can start learning what to do,
Yeah.
how to use this one. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful
you.
day. And I hope the blueberry crisp turned out well.
Yeah, me too. Thanks.